Welcome back to the Decentralized Social Media App Lesson 3. So we're going to tailor the login framework on the client side today. We're going to start off taking things out we don't need, like the nav in particular is not going to exist here. That actually is just going to be a single page app, so we're not going to be switching up a lot of things here. It's going to stay consistent. We are going to be adding the options for themes so that users can customize the look and feel of their app. And by doing this, we're also going to be saving it in local storage. So basically, when they start back up, it'll always stay consistent with the theme they've chosen from Bootstrap. It's a Bootswatch, actually. So main content is a file that was familiar when we did the original. And ultimately, that main content is going to be like the main page for this one, since it's just a one-page app, a single page. Now, the user is going to be something that we're going to be having a lot of attributes. The user comes with it. They're going to bring in a banner, the theme, obviously, and an avatar. There's going to be a few things that we're going to have to tie into that so it fits the way they want this thing to look. Like I said, we're going to take out the nav, so just delete that right out of the HTML. And let's go ahead and get the active module out, because we will not be using that either. There's not going to be swapping around of the modules. They're all on one page. So let's get the rest of our hooks prepared. Avatar, obviously, is going to be something unique to each independent user. And you'll be seeing that used on the top of where the banner is, and also you'll see it along with when they use the messaging application. Obviously, the banner is going to be something that we're going to be able to swap in and out. Both these items have a default that we'll be saving within the files, this app's file system. So it'll be in the image folder in the public domain. So we can start there, and then when they bring something else in, we'll replace it. Let's go ahead and build that image folder within the public folder. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab our defaults from the original. Great. So they're nothing special. It's just something to start with. And that's an interesting thing. We'll not be like creating something. They'll already be there. We'll just be updating them, and that'll be that. So when we validate, now that we have all these really specific things regarding our user, I'm going to go ahead and with our validate user function, I'm going to throw in all these other calls so that we can get started with the tailor-made to fit look and feel for the individual profile. We're just adding on to what we already had when we built our login framework. So since this is so much more detailed, there's a couple more calls to make once we know this is the actual user. And we'll just be setting the hooks that we just prepared earlier, a few minutes ago. And these are just like any other callbacks when we use Axios. And if it doesn't show up, if the theme comes out like it's no good, it's like falsy, basically, that doesn't turn up to be something we want, it's just going to go to the default. And make sure that, to me, I usually write client side and server side when I make calls like this, because the chances of me working on the wrong one is, since they're so similar, then it's just one of those things where I have to write it up there, because if I'm not looking close enough, I can mess up the server side while trying to update the client side. These are identical calls, so we're just going to make a couple value changes, and it'll be fine. And if it doesn't show up if they have any details, something maybe didn't work, we'll just get it to make sure that it shows the default image profile image. And obviously, just like all the other calls, if there's an error, it'll fire that off. And we're going to be doing the same thing with the banner. Great. And so the reason we're doing this is because when the data comes in, it is in this kind of square bracket, so it does make it iterable. So even though there's only one, you still have to put the 0, because otherwise it'll show up as like an undefined. So anything that has if you get an object and it's got the brackets, you got to kind of remember that now the JavaScript's going to think it's iterable, so you need to make a 0. If it shows up with these curly braces, not so much. You don't really use that 0. You use a dot. Okay, let's go ahead and fix this up. We know that there's no level, so in which case we are going to swap that out for theme, because that's something we're just going to go ahead and need to have when we create user. And everything else will default to whatever it was originally locally. But I need to have something for theme, so this is what I'm going to go ahead and do for a new user once they get started, so we can start somewhere. And obviously we need to have the file available for default. Now, a lot of this stuff I'm just tailoring a little bit more, what we do and don't need. Main content's there, but it's the only thing there. So we're not going to have a lot of modules on the outside that are going to replace it. Now we're just going to be building around it. Like our banner is going to be in existence as opposed to the navbar. Banner's going to have a couple things involved with it that we were already speaking of a second ago. Main content's going to have a lot of stuff, pretty much everything. We're going to need to obviously know who we're dealing with, so we can get all their details. But this is where you're going to see the information regarding the posts selected, and you're going to see all the little lists of who you're working with. Now the footer, we're going to go ahead and add on to what we already had. The footer, you could already do a couple things like change password and delete user. So let's go ahead and bring in our theme. This is something you can change. We're adding this on to what we currently had. And along with this theme, there's going to be it's a little API. So if it fails, it'll be you need to make sure that it knows how to call an alert to allow the user to know if the theme worked or didn't. So we're just kind of setting up our footer to fit what we actually want to have in there. Now the user, that's going to be an important component based on the details they choose for their profile. So we just need to pass along the functionality and the values that they're going to need to create this component. When we get to user, we'll be using these, so we need to pass them on from this app to further down into the footer. Like I said, this is all the customizable stuff down here in the footer for the user. And just kind of spread this out. We're using the grid, so we're doing 3 columns of 4 in the footer. So writing client-side functionality. Let's go ahead and get this thing created. The main content, we have our default here, and we're just going to be building on to our default where we started, or where we left off. Now, we're going to have to import a whole bunch of things. First and foremost, Axios, which is going to be utilizing fetch. And that's going to be bringing us our data, sending out any kind of input we've got. The UI, or UUID, is going to be something we're going to have to use as an identifier. Our network, obviously, is going to be all the people we're involved with on this platform. So we need a list of those individuals. and that's going to be its own module shortly. Now, this React HTML parser, you have to it's kind of a security risk when you throw in HTML. So you want to make sure that that's been sanitized, and it's not going to be something where your app is vulnerable. So React HTML parser is a function that is going to be coming in. And let me go ahead and write all these functions down. And so, as you can see, I'm going to have to be installing React HTML parser. And that's going to help me cleanse out any kind of vulnerabilities if I display HTML. Stage is going to be the component where we have our messenger. And filter feeds, this is going to be something where we can tell it, hey, we don't want to hear about this detail. So go ahead and take any stories out regarding that. It's going to be filtering our feeds. Paths is where our API is going to be located. And anything else that we could just go back to, we can use paths, and so everything's kind of in one place. So let's go ahead and start with our hooks. And if you're familiar with a lot of my use effects, I start off with confirming something's loaded first, and then from there I start making sure I can get the data needed. If I do beforehand, it'll break. So as you can see, when I get into my use effects, I'm going to utilize that first. Now the object is going to be basically everything we've gathered on the user's what they select. And you'll see here in a minute that where we use all these variables. And filter, obviously, where they can look for specific titles and see, and then kind of cut through and find what they're looking for through the feeds that they select. This is whose feed, obviously, is going to be returning whose exact feed you've been looking at. So whoever your list is, you select one, and that would be the whose feed concept. And like I said, we do have a remove list in case you don't want to hear about some specific topic. This will be in a list we're going to provide here, and we'll build on that list, curating it, and then we'll hunt through the list to see what stories do and don't have that, and that's what we'll display. And this is all pretty straightforward, where the addresses are, what we're looking at. And obviously what's active and what's not. And these will all come into fruition here in a second when I start typing up the actual functionality in the HTML. I just got to get everything prepared. It's a lot easier for me to walk through this once I've already built it. For anybody to watch how I actually work would be really confusing, because I'll come in piece by piece, different days at a time with different ideas, or I'll bring in functions that I have in other projects that I think would work here. Obviously here now I'm setting my favorites. So I have to make a video like this, I need to kind of start at the beginning and walk you through what I've done. Otherwise it would just be so scatterbrained. And sometimes I'll come back 6 months, a year later and add on to things. So it really wouldn't make any sense unless I did some kind of start to finish format. And so these show all will be displaying what exactly we're looking at here. Let's go ahead and type up all the things we're going to need to pass on to main content from the app. Now config obviously is going to be a big one. The toggle function, couldn't do without it. This is when you're telling the user's telling the application what feed they want to see. And it doesn't look like much. We're going to be using the show and set show. But whatever is equal to show, that's the story we're going to be looking at based on the title. So if I hit toggle and I pass the item down and it says that I want to see this title, all the other posts will close down and just that one title will show. Really important. Obviously, we got to grab the favorites for the user. Anything they've ever selected that they liked, this is going to be something that's going to be passed on and saved. And they can unfavorite things too. It doesn't matter. It's just going to update this list. And here we're actually just calling to get the list. So I'm doing this really safe. Temp data is always something that I can play along with within this small scope and not interfering with any other variables. It's just something intended for this temporary scope of time while I'm just right here in this bracket. And then from there I can push it on to be something that we have already defined. But it's a safe bet that temp data is something you're going to see me use as you have all the time. Now I'm going to loop through all of our data that we've got, and I'm going to start filling up the values that I need through my response. It looks like that might be in the wrong spot. I'll probably come back around if it is. It would just be setting it every time it looped through. It probably should be at the bottom after the for loop. We'll take a look here in a second. So client side, add delete function. So this is an interesting one. From what I remember doing this, I actually combined the two. Okay, so when I favorite something, this is pretty simple. It's got a function called favorite. Along with that post, it has a GUID, which is an identifier. If I click favorite, I'm going to pass that identifying number. And then we're going to go ahead and get it added to the favorite list. So it's going to go through all the favorites, and it says, does this one already exist with the... If it's -1, it means no, that doesn't exist in the list just yet. So in the favorites list, if it's -1, go ahead and add this to it. You don't want to obviously add the same one twice. That would actually turn it off. And I'm just going to clear out a few things. These replace things. It looks like I'm just cleaning it up. So we'll go ahead and verify that this is the correct token. And then at this point, if it is the correct token, we will be going ahead and grabbing the favorites of the specific user. And then we're going to confirm with our show alert command that who this was recommended by. And as always, our callback is going to find out if there was an error. We're going to need to do the opposite. Let them know that that did not work. And like I said, -1 means it is not in the list. If it's not -1, that means this GUID does exist currently in the existing list. And I'm just going to deduce that if you've clicked it again and it does exist, then you're trying to delete it. So when I use this favorite functionality, I'm actually doing kind of two things. I'm determining if it exists, then we're going to take it out. If it doesn't exist, well, then we're going to add it. That way I don't have to write, the same... You're really just combining things and condensing it down to one function. And through the art of deduction, I figured out what they want to do. And it's as always, it's going to be the same process of a callback and getting our response. Now, granted, what I'm doing here is saying we're going to go through all the favorites, and this specific one, if it's not listed, if I'm going to go ahead and put all the favorites back where they were, except for unless it matches. So as long as it doesn't match the GUID, we're going to put it back into temp data. We're going to do it correctly after the for loop and set it to set favorites, so that everything except for what was selected gets there. Now, like I recommend, do this after the for loop, not like the one up there, because I'm going to have to go back and fix that one. Because then it's just setting things every time. It iterates, which is not good. Okay, so in case we get an error, I need to confirm like what happened and pass that on to the user within their console. All right, so let's do the takeout feeds function. Just simple basic for loop. Start off with the number 0. At this point, we're going to have to do a nested for loop. So we will not be using I because it's already being used in the parent for loop. We'll be using J. It's just that it doesn't really matter what you use. I just need to make sure it's not the same as the one its parent is involved with. So I'm going to go through the remove list, and I'm also going to go through the object. So if the object title in lowercase or in the description, so we're going to hunt down anything. And if we find out that the item in remove list that we were originally looping through matches anything in here, so the index of means it's somewhere in the string you found a match for something we found in the remove list. If that remove list is represented somewhere in this content or title of each one of the posts, we're going to be aware of it. And that means if it's -1, we can go ahead and let it through because it doesn't exist. If it actually is not -1, we need to keep it out. There you go. And in this case, we're not really taking it out, we're just hiding it. So if we find out that something is represented that we didn't want to see within our remove list, we're just hiding it. It's a fast way to basically let the user know that they didn't want to see it, but it's technically still there. It's a pretty easy way to just make things out of the way. So if it's not on the list, then we remove hide if hide was there in the first place. Pretty straightforward stuff, and then we'll go ahead and set our hooks. All right, let's just go ahead and do a basic grab data. And we're going to be using this to fill up our main content news feed. So whatever you select will be presented for you. Obviously, we have a path stored in the it's up there in the top where we define paths. I have a couple things listed, and this happens to be the very first one, called RSS endpoint. And then it has an address that we're just going to add to it that ultimately someone sent to us. The address was brought to us with the grab data function. So we fire off this address to that endpoint. And that endpoint will in turn give us back all the XML from that. Well, I actually asked for JSON this time. And so when we fire off to that endpoint with that address, the endpoint will return all the data for this specific news feed. And it's also going to bring with it, it's going to be an object, so it's going to bring the publish date, the GUID, the content, the title. There's going to be a lot of things that come with it. And this is how we'll be handling our news feed down below. Obviously, if it doesn't work, here's once again an error, console error, to let us know that the call out for our object failed. Now that you'll find out, but that endpoint that's actually going to be a PHP file that I'll go ahead and provide. It's a real simple one. Now we start setting a whole bunch of things. We're going to let the app know what address is active, and that's going to be at the top of the feed. We need to go ahead and reset, and so none of the posts are open just yet. Now let's grab the feed list here. Now the feed list is, say I select one of my friends, and they have any number of news feeds that they like, and they have in their list. When I select that individual, the list of all the feeds that they have selected and keep in their library and archives, all those lists of feeds will show up. So I might have completely different opinions and or different news interests, and if I click on someone else, they might have a whole list of the ones I've never heard of. So you get to share. Now I also want to know let's say I log in, I want to know if somebody already had saved their last feed, if they've been here before and they were reading something. Let's just go ahead and I need to set this to whatever was saved in the session storage. I just want to save that each time, so that they don't get lost. And then we'll set it if that's the case. And so once we've determined what we're going to be looking for, what feed, and then we go ahead and ask. We go ahead and go to our API feeds. All right, pretty standard stuff. We also want to get the favorites from the feed. And if we want to add one feed to our own selection, we'll go ahead and make that possible here with the client side. So let's say you found a new news blog or something that you really like. Get the feed address, and you basically plug it in. This function will grab it. What I like is I got so excited about writing this, I actually didn't write the function call at the beginning. So here I am writing all the meat to this function, but there's no call, so I'll have to come back around and realize that I missed a line when I was copying. but it'll say like add feed, like function add feed, and then you know how a function looks. I'll wrap this with that. Can't say I'm the best at copying things. I'm better at just writing them down. Looking over to the left every once in a while to copy something is not the greatest way. It's full of human errors. As you can see, I think up there on the line 122, I've got user feed with 2 E's. So as you can see, I will be back. Okay, so field has been determined up here as add feed URL, and so I'll be representing, instead of writing document query selector input name add feed URL, I just write the word field. It just, obviously, if you can save on space and text, do it. I mean, if you're only going to mention it once, then who cares? But if it gets mentioned tons of times, yeah. I mean, I would have had to write that out, I don't know how many times. Now I'm just writing the word field everywhere. It's way better. But it's up to you. I think it gets messy if you just let it go. So this is the object I'll be sending when I add. These are all the keys and values that are going to be expected on the server. Now I'm creating the ID by combining things. It has the user email and a unique ID. So there's going to be a couple ways that can come in handy when you're searching for things. Yes, you're looking for this specific user, and it's got to be the specific one from that user. So it's you can split that ID into determining multiple things. Use that all the time. A lot of times I do that with a date stamp too. So it was so and so at this time, and depending on what you're looking for. Now, obviously, if you don't like a news post anymore, there's always the ability to delete it. I'm going to go ahead and provide that option here. Delete's a real basic one. We've been through this 1,000 times. As you can see, I am passing a config because we don't want just anybody to be able to delete. We're going through our callback grab feed list if we're all good, and just if there's an error, obviously we're going to pass that on. Real simple. Load user. There's going to be a lot of things that happen. Load user is going to be something that gets called when I use use effect. If everything is determined to be correct for the use effect to fire off, I'm going to fire off load user at that moment. So basically, there's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen. As you can see, it's just something that's kind of orbiting outside when it starts to get called if everything meets the appropriate start curriculum. All these functions are going to get fired. And obviously we're going to be saving the last feed the user was using too. Now, as I said, use effect, I tend to go about this way. Have we gone through the loaded yet? Have we done all this? If it's false, that means no, because I only want to fire this off one time. And I don't want it to keep doing all this stuff. So I'm going to say that loaded is now true. And so this will never work again. Unless the page refreshes. That's it. Unless there's a new data or something, we're just going to be sitting here watching that. Otherwise, this thing will loop and eventually crash. And here we're going to also fire off a few more functions. And presumably now we're going to write our HTML. And this is going to be the HTML you're going to see for the total day. This is a complete finished look. As you can see, we got a column on the left with a search. We've got any number of post links. One of them's open. And then on the right was all of our other stuff. So the very, very top, is going to be something that's going to show our active feed. It's also going to have a trash can, so if you want to delete that feed, and we can move on to the next one. And it also has a search, so you can look through this news feed's posts within a certain fashion that's a little more agile with the search and the filter. So the whole app is going to be wrapped in a container. And if you're familiar with Bootstrap, this is just how everything works. The main section is 8 out of 12. So the right column is going to be a 4. This is an 8. Let's get through our headings. And we're in whose feed is the user we're using. And we'll break this down into fragments so that React can render it properly. Now here is an interesting, it's a button that I'm going to go ahead and put. So if you click it, it's going to have a trash can icon in it. And this will call out the function to delete the feed you're looking at. So, another way to curate your list. Yeah, it's surprising how much is actually up in the very, very top above the feed. There's, quite a bit of functionality up there. So let's go ahead and put in our font awesome trash can. And you'll see I'll also have a class called pointer, which since this really isn't this isn't a button, so it won't matter. I won't have to use that here. We're good. All right, and then this is going to show us the address we're actually looking at. And now we'll be determining so when you actually remove a feed, it's going to ask you if are you sure do I want to delete this or not? So it's just a last moment thing before something gets deleted. Very common. So it clears up in case you hit a button by accident, it doesn't delete something. It keeps from the human error, which is usually almost always the problem. I've found computers don't really have errors. It's somebody did something wrong. Computers are just doing what they're told. Yeah, this looks a lot like other items. If you're familiar with some other work, you'll see me do these yes nos, and then we'll close it down with an empty character string in case they say no. Hopefully I'll go back and change the two yeses, and one of them will be no at the bottom. If not, I'll have to go back and make sure that I did or didn't do it. And I've found writing these ternary operators, this one is really big. There's a bunch of things going on here. So as you notice, I'm actually going to be writing, for these purposes of writing this down for a tutorial, I'm writing the second half of the ternary operator as well, right at the beginning. I don't want to leave anything blank because it's a really easy way for me to get lost. So I'm writing the ternary operator. You'll be seeing here me in a minute. Doing the if false, I'll be doing that first, so we don't get confused. Once you get a page this big, it's really easy to get confused. Probably, maybe when I'm towards the end, I'll upgrade this from my old code, and I'll maybe even compartmentalize some of these. So let's go ahead and install the React HTML parser, because when we show the people's feed, there's going to be coming with it some HTML with that JSON, and I've got to guarantee that it's not going to have any vulnerabilities. So let me just go ahead and install. I'm not sure if I don't think that I actually recorded this whole thing. I think NPM was giving me some crap, so this is me starting off the installation. I think it failed, and I argued with it, but I didn't record that part because it's boring. But we eventually got it installed. What happened mainly is just make sure that all your NPM stuff, Git, all that stuff, make sure you're up to date, and you're going to have a lot less problems. Like, it'll even tell you, hey, you haven't updated in a while, you need to do this. Just do it, because then you're just going to avoid problems in the future. Okay, so this is what it looks like if something's displayed. Now, this is the one we're going to write initially, and then the second one on this ternary operator is going to be when it's closed. So they're both going to be in this, list here we're about to create, and then this list group. And we're going to ask it, so this object that we've built up, if its length is 0, or if it's not 0, let's go ahead and write this feed and write all of our information down. And if it's not, as you can see, I'm doing the negative part of our ternary operator. When it says 0, then we're just going to say this thing's loading. So as you can see, I've written the negative one first, and now we'll write if it doesn't equal 0 next. So if the length is 0, it says loading. That's the easiest way to say it. Now let's write the complicated part. We're going to be doing a map. So I'm going to map through this object that we received, and there's going to be a few keys and values I need to decipher to put into our display. So the main object now is called post. Post title and post description, I'm going to go ahead and combine for the very reason of my search. Now, content is going to be something I can verify. So when we're doing a search, does this word show up in the title or in the content? Anywhere. So if I typed in something that I didn't want to hear about, I can know that I can take it out. As you can see, I'm turning it all to lowercase string, and it's very specific. So I will show if the post title matches the show. And now if it doesn't, it'll just say this is where we were going to have the closed option. So here we go. When it's open, these are the line item attributes I need to go ahead and add to it. And if it's, let's say that users, they only can click one at a time. So if post title equals show, they'll show this one. And the other one, it'll just be no body, no content. It'll just be the title showing. All right, let's get those class name. Obviously, this is the one selected, so it's going to be active. Let's do our iteration. Now, the style is where our search comes in. If for some reason within our content we find something that's within our search, this is going to determine a hide or show. So if it doesn't equal -1, we're going to go ahead and show it. If it does equal -1, then we're going to hide it. Data filter. This is going to come in handy. We're just going to do an iteration character number there. And then on click, we're going to fire off our favorite function, toggle, which would, below we're going to have initially our title, and who favorites this as well. We'll just put a little heart in here. So if somebody favors it, we'll write the individual's name here. And this is going to be our card where it's going to have the body of the post. So it's a blog post, so basically whatever text it has, whatever content. And I'm just getting things organized. I basically need to move my div, but it'll happen here in a second. It looks pretty bad with all the red in there. And here's where we bring in our cleansing of the HTML. I do want to show the content, but I just want to trust it. So here's all the description is what the blog would call the content of the post. And we'll also have the option to favorite things down here too. There we go. This is how we identify which one we want to favorite. There we go. It's the heart from Font Awesome. And since it's just an icon, I want to put the pointer class there so that it'll look as if it's a button when it points. And let's just clean this up. That looks like it works. Now we'll do the bottom section of the card footer. Usually they'll put things like the date of the post here, the published date. It's rather long, so let's just go ahead and keep it short with a substring. And if they wanted to see the rest of the original, because sometimes the feeds are only giving you a portion based on what they're allowing, so that will get you to the original link with that click right there. Okay, so this is what it looks like with nothing selected yet, and I had written the word closed in there to represent this, but it's basically the same thing, but with no content being shown. So we're just toggling with the toggle function. When I click something, it closes all of them except for the one I clicked. And here we are with if the search shows that we're trying to hide something or looking for something, this is where it determines what to hide and show. Inherit meaning it was going to show it. None meaning it's going to hide it within our display. Very handy ternary operator to quickly show and hide things. And for toggle, if I post that title, if I click it, that title is going to go over there, and that's what we'll see. That's what will be active. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to finish this off. There we go. So you can favorite this one as well. And loading just means that it hasn't loaded yet. So we talked about that one in the beginning. So there's a couple ternary operators going on here. So let's just build the right column. It's going to be a real simple one because most of the right column are modules that are brought in later on. So we're just going to be representing them, but we won't be building them in this lesson. The first one's going to be really easy. And this one will just be something running through a list. So when we select a user's feed, including ours, this is going to be their list of feeds. So I'm just going to, whenever we select one, it'll give us a whole list, and this is going to be populated. And obviously it won't do anything if the list is empty. That can't be right. OGK. OBJ. So once we select one of these, we will be doing a grab data of that ID and that address to populate our feed. And then we're just going to show, each one of them being represented. But we're going to clear out the HTTPS and HTTP just because it takes so much space up. Okay, another ternary operator. And at the if it's false, it'll be null. And we're just going to be determining whose feed this is. So basically, if it's my email being shown, I can add a feed address right here. And this will be added to my personal archive. I can't add to anybody else's. So if someone else is selected and I'm looking at their archives list, I can't change it. But if it's mine, this input shows up and it says, would you like to add something? Feed address URL. All you do is just place it and it'll add the feed. So you can curate your feed here. Nobody else's. All right, so these are the components that I'll be building later that we want to represent here. Obviously, we're going to be building a new module named network, which would be representing all the people we follow. It's going to have a few things we need to pass down with it. This will be the list of people thus far that I follow. It needs to know who I am. It needs to know my avatar. There we go. These are all the details. So how we are curating our items, where we're removing items, these are functions that need to be going passed down to our filter feeds module. We haven't built it yet. It's going to come. I just need to get these prepared. This function needs to get there. This function set filter needs to be available. And obviously the value filter. This function and variable and value as well. And who am I? That will be important. And this is, of course, our function here will be necessary. And what we'll be hiding. And the stage is just the messaging system. It actually was a project that I built separately, and I've included it here because I figured it'd be useful. So it's its own entity. It just needs to know a few things that were determined here, like the avatar and the whoever's logged in. And obviously the show alert is something that we're going to be using when we utilize this function, this module as well. Okay, so I'm going to add the function call. It says add feed now, and I'm going to put my comments there. And as you can see, I also went through and there was a couple misspellings. I just want to show you that I went ahead and spelled things correctly, walked through and made sure there was no two E's in user feed. And there was a couple other ones I noticed. I think active at one point I spelled wrong. So I'm just combing through and looking for all my misspellings and stuff. But we'll see you next time.